when 11-year-old Julia pushed open the heavy steel door of the Hells Angels clubhouse on that Tuesday afternoon. She had no idea she was about to change not just her own life, but the lives of 32 hardened bikers who thought they'd seen everything. The door creaked on its hinges, and sunlight poured into the dimly lit room like a spotlight on a stage. 12 massive men, covered in leather and tattoos, stopped mid-con. Beer bottles paused halfway to lips. Pool cues froze in calloused hands. Every eye turned toward the small figure standing in the doorway. Julia stood there, her pink backpack sliding off one thin shoulder, her sneakers scuffed and worn at the toes. But it wasn't her size, or her disheveled appearance, that made the room fall into complete silence. It was the fresh black eye that darkened half her face a bruise, so dark it looked almost purple in the afternoon light. Robert, the chapter president, was the first to move. At 6'4", with arms like tree trunks and a gray beard that reached his chest, he'd been leading this chapter for 15 years. He'd seen violence, pain, and suffering, but something about this child's face made his stomach turn. "You lost, kid?" Ben asked from the corner, his voice gentler than his appearance suggested. He set down his pool cue carefully, as if afraid any sudden movement might scare her away. Julia swallowed hard. Her throat felt tight, and for a moment she wondered if this was the stupidest idea she'd ever had. These were Hell's Angels. Everyone in town whispered about them, crossed the street when they rode by, warned their children to stay away. But Julia had nowhere else to turn. She lifted her chin, trying to look braver than she felt. "Career day at school next Friday," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Then louder, pushing the words out before her courage failed. "Everyone brings a parent to talk about their job. I don't have anyone." She paused, her eyes scanning the faces staring back at her. "Can one of you be my dad for one day?" The silence that followed was so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Every single man in that room had his own story. Diego had grown up with an alcoholic father who'd used him as a punching bag. Tommy had bounced through 7 foster homes before aging out of the system. Miguel had slept in his car for 2 years as a teenager. Robert himself had run away from home at 14 to escape his stepfather's fists. They knew that look in Julia's eyes. They'd all worn it once. Robert crouched down, bringing his massive frame closer to Julia's level. His voice was gentle, almost fatherly. "What about your folks, sweetheart? Your mom? Your dad?" Julia's lower lip trembled, but she didn't cry. "My real dad died in Afghanistan 4 years ago," she said, each word carefully controlled. "He was a Marine. He was brave." She touched the small chain around her neck. Dog tags that caught the light. "Mom's boyfriend, Dale. He's not the Korea Day type." Her fingers unconsciously brushed the bruise on her face. Diego moved closer, his boots heavy on the concrete floor. He knelt beside her, his eyes leveled with hers. "That shiner on your face. How'd you get it?" "Fell off my bike," Julia said automatically. It was the lie she'd practiced 100 times in the mirror. The one she'd told her teacher, the school nurse, her neighbor. But here, in this room full of men who knew what lies tasted like, it sounded hollow, even to her own ears. She looked down at her feet. "Dale gets mad when Mom's at work. She works double shifts at the diner, trying to keep us afloat. Yesterday I forgot to take out the trash." Her voice dropped to almost nothing. "He said I was useless, said I couldn't do anything right. Then She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Robert's hands clenched into fists, so tight his knuckles went white. Ben's jaw worked silently. Diego's eyes blazed with a fury that had nothing to do with the small girl in front of him, and everything to do with the coward who'd laid hands on her. If this story is touching your heart, subscribe to Road Motorcycle Diaries, where we share real stories of courage, compassion, and the unexpected heroes who change lives. Robert took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help Julia. "Tell me about school, kid. How are things there?" Julia's face crumpled slightly, and for the first time, tears threatened to spill over. "There's this boy, Nicholas, and his friends, Brett and Jason. They corner me every day. They call me orphan girl, steal my lunch money, push me into lockers. Her voice cracked. Last week, they threw my dad's dog tags in the trash. I had to dig through garbage to find them. These are all I have left of him. She held up the tags, and every man in the room saw the trembling in her small hands. The teachers don't see it, or they don't care. Nicholas's dad is some big-shot lawyer, so nobody believes me when I try to tell them. They say I'm being dramatic. They say kids will be kids. She wiped her eyes roughly with the back of her hand. I just want one day where I'm not alone, one day where someone is in my corner. Tommy, who'd been silent until now, spoke up. Why us, kid? Why come to a bunch of bikers? Julia looked up at him, and in her eyes was a wisdom far beyond her 11 years. Because nobody messes with you? She said simply. Because you're strong. Because if you came to my school just once, maybe Nicholas and his friends would leave me alone. Maybe for one day, I could feel like I have a family who cares. She paused. Maybe for one day, I could feel like my dad would, if he was still here. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Robert stood up and looked around at his brothers. They'd fought together. Bled Tocheter built this club on brotherhood and loyalty. They'd sworn to protect each other, to stand together against a world that had tried to break them all. Friday morning, Robert said. Show of hands. Who's in? One by one, every single hand in the room went up. Not just the 12 who were there with and unaware, as word spread through calls and texts. 32 members had committed to showing up. Robert looked down at Julia. We'll be there, kid. All of us. Julia's face transformed. The fear, the pain, the loneliness for just a moment. It all lifted. She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes, and she stood a little taller as she turned to leave. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. As the door closed behind her, Robert turned to his brothers. Friday, he said. We ride for Julia. But none of them knew that Friday would be just the beginning. None of them knew that this one act of kindness was about to spiral into something that would change their entire community, or that the bullies tormenting Julia were hiding their own desperate secrets. Friday morning arrived with gray skies that threatened rain, perfectly matching the knot of anxiety twisting in Julia's stomach as she woke at 5 a.m. 2 hours before her alarm was set to ring. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling with its water-stained corners, listening to the sounds of Dale snoring in the next room. Her mother had already left for the early shift at the diner, leaving Julia alone with her fears. What if the bikers had forgotten? What if it had all been some cruel joke? What if she walked into school today and had to face the humiliation of standing alone while every other kid had their parents there, talking proudly about their careers? Her fingers found the dog tags around her neck, and she whispered to the memory of her father, "Please let them come, Dad. Please." She got dressed carefully, choosing the only good shirt she owned, a white button-up that she'd worn to her father's funeral 4 years ago. It was getting small now, the sleeves a bit too short, but it was the nicest thing she had. She wanted to look her best, just in case. The walk to school felt like walking to her own execution. Nicholas was waiting by the lockers, as always, with Brett and Jason flanking him like bodyguards. His perfectly styled hair and expensive sneakers screamed privilege, everything Julia didn't have. "Orphan girl," Nicholas called out, his voice dripping with mock sweetness. "Did your imaginary daddy remember to come today?" His friends laughed on cue, like a rehearsed performance they'd done 1,000 times. Brett shoved her hard into the lockers. The metal edge caught her shoulder, sending a sharp pain down her arm. "Nobody's coming for you," he sneered. "Nobody cares about trash, like you." Julia kept walking, counting her steps like her father had taught her during thunderstorms when she was little. 1, 2, 3, 4. Just keep moving. Don't let them see you cry. 23, 24, 25. By 9:30, the classroom was filling up. Nicholas's father arrived in an expensive suit, already commanding attention as he talked loudly about his law practice. Emma's mom came in nurse scrubs, smiling warmly. David's dad wore his police uniform, badge gleaming. One by one, the desks filled with proud parents ready to share their worlds. Julia sat alone at her desk in the back corner, the empty chair beside her like a monument to her loneliness. Mrs. Peterson kept glancing at her with pity, which somehow felt worse than Nicholas's cruelty. Then, at exactly 9:47 a.m., the rumble started. It began as a low vibration, barely noticeable, but it grew and grew. The windows started to rattle in their frames. Pencils rolled off desks. The fluorescent lights seemed to buzz in harmony with the sound that was building outside like an approaching thunderstorm. Mrs. Peterson walked to the window, her face going pale. "Oh my God," she whispered. 32 motorcycles rolled into the parking lot in perfect military formation, 2 columns, precise as soldiers on parade. They moved as one organism, their chrome gleaming even under the gray sky, their engines creating a symphony of power that shook the very foundation of Roosevelt Elementary School. Then, simultaneously, as if choreographed by some invisible conductor, all 32 engines cut off. The sudden silence was almost louder than the noise had been. Nicholas's father stopped mid-sentence, his expensive words dying in his throat. Every parent, every teacher, every student rushed to the windows. 32 Hell's Angels dismounted their bikes. Leather jackets adorned with patches and stories of roads traveled, boots that had walked through fire and pain, faces weathered by sun and hardship. They moved in formation, walking toward the school entrance, with purpose and dignity. Julia's heart stopped. They came. They actually came. The classroom door opened. Robert walked in first, his presence filling the entire room. He was followed by Ben, Diego, Miguel, Tommy, and 27 others. They filed in silently, lining the walls of the classroom like guardians, like warriors, like family. Mrs. Peterson stood frozen, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Nicholas's father had gone from pale to red, his hand unconsciously moving to his phone. The other parents shifted uncomfortably, pulling their children closer. Robert's deep voice cut through the silence. "We're here for Julia." Every eye in the room turned to the small girl in the back corner. Julia stood up slowly, her legs shaking, tears streaming down her face. But she was smiling so wide her face hurt. "Everyone," Julia said, her voice stronger than it had ever been. "These are my dads." For the next hour, the Hells Angels commanded that classroom like seasoned professors. Robert talked about motorcycle mechanics, explaining physics and engineering in ways that made even the most disinterested students lean forward. Diego discussed the mathematics of road trips, calculating fuel efficiency, mapping routes, understanding speed and distance. Ben, who'd been a medic in the army, talked about first aid and emergency response. Tommy shared stories about their annual toy drive, how they collected thousands of gifts for children in hospitals and foster care every Christmas. McGay, his voice thick with emotion, talked about their work protecting abuse survivors. "I grew up with a father who used his fists instead of his words," Miguel said, looking directly at the students. "I know what it's like to be small and scared and think nobody cares. Real strength isn't about being the biggest or the loudest. Real strength is protecting those who can't protect themselves." The students were mesmerized. Even Nicholas sat still, his usual smirk gone, replaced by something that looked almost like respect or maybe fear. Robert walked over to Julia's desk and knelt down beside her chair. "You asked for one dad for one day," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're stuck with 32 of US forever. That's how family works." The classroom erupted in applause. Kids cheered. Several parents clapped reluctantly. Even Nicholas found himself clapping, though he looked stunned, as if his hands were moving without his permission. After the presentations, as parents and students mingled with cookies and juice, Nicholas's father, Tom Bradford, approached Robert with a forced smile. "Quite the entrance," he said, trying to inject humor into his nervous voice. "Must have been expensive. Getting all those bikes." Robert cut him off, his voice low and deadly serious. "Your boy, Nicholas, he's been giving Julia trouble, threatening her, stealing from her, throwing her father's military dog tags at fallen Marines. Dog tags in the trash. He stepped closer, and Tom Bradford instinctively stepped back. That stops today, not next week, not tomorrow. Today. Do we understand each other, Counselor? Tom Bradford's face went from red to white. He nodded, unable to find words. Good, Robert said. Then his face softened slightly. Kids act out for reasons. Maybe find out what's going on with your son before it's too late. As the bikers filed out, each one stopped to hug Julia, to ruffle her hair, to tell her they were just a phone call away. Diego pressed a card into her hand with his number. Anything, anytime, you call. That weekend, Julia found herself at the clubhouse, her hands black with grease, as Ben taught her how to change oil. Her laughter echoed off the concrete walls, real laughter, the kind that comes from deep in the belly when you finally feel safe. But Monday brought a new storm. Dale came home drunk and furious, his face red with rage. He'd seen the video someone had filmed the bikers' arrival, and it had gone viral. Tens of thousands of views. Comments praising Julia's biker family. You think you're special now? Daily screamed, grabbing Julia by her shirt and slamming her against the wall. You think some thugs on motorcycles make you better than me? The front door opened. Dale didn't hear it over his own shouting. Robert, Ben, Diego, and 4 others walked in silently. Julia's mother, Jennifer, had given them a key after the career day, sensing that her daughter might need protection. They didn't say a word at first. They just stood there, and the sight of them, these massive men with their leather and their loyalty, made Dale's hand drop from Julia's shirt like he'd been burned. Robert placed a manila folder on the kitchen table. We've been busy. Dale! Photos of Julia's bruises, medical records from her school nurse, documenting injuries, statements from neighbors about the screaming they hear when Jennifer's at work. We've also had some interesting conversations with your parole officer, yeah. We know about that assault charge from 2 years ago. Dale's face went from red to gray. You have 2 choices, Robert continued, his voice calm but absolute. Choice 1. You pack your things right now. You leave, and you never come back. You don't call, you don't write. You disappear from their lives completely. Choice 2. We give all of this to the police. You violate your parole, and you spend the next 5 to 10 years in prison. And I promise you, Dale, we know people inside. Your life there would be very, very unpleasant. 20 minutes later, Dale's truck disappeared down the street, everything he owned crammed in the back. He didn't even look back. When Jennifer came home from her shift, she found her apartment full of bikers, boxers of pizza on the counter, and her daughter safe, smiling, surrounded by guardians who'd chosen to care. Jennifer broke down, sliding to the floor as relief overwhelmed her. Why us? She whispered through her tears. Why would you do all this for us? Robert knelt beside her, this massive biker with his gray beard and kind eyes. Because your daughter was brave enough to ask for help. And because nobody should have to face the darkness alone. Subscribe to Road Motorcycle Diaries. Hit that like button. And don't miss Part 3, because Julia's story is about to take an unexpected turn that will change everything you thought you knew about bullies and heroes. 3 weeks after Dale's departure, Robert noticed something that made him pause during one of Julia's weekend visits to the clubhouse. Nicholas Bradford was standing across the street, partially hidden behind a tree, watching the clubhouse with an expression that wasn't curiosity or fear, it was longing. Robert had seen enough broken kids to recognize the signs. The boy looked different from career day. His expensive clothes were rumpled, hanging loose on a frame that seemed thinner. Dark circles shadowed his eyes. His perfect hair was This wasn't the arrogant bully who'd tormented Julia. This was a kid who was drowning. Diego, Robert called out, see that kid across the street? Find out what's going on. What Diego discovered over the next few days made the biker's blood run cold, but for different reasons than Dale had. Nicholas's mother, Catherine, had died of cancer 8 months ago. The lawyer father, Tom Bradford, who'd seemed so confident and put together at career day, was drowning his grief in bourbon every night. The expensive house was a facade inside. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, laundry went unwashed, and a 12-year-old boy tried to hold together a life that was falling apart. Nicholas's cruelty toward Julia hadn't been random evil. It had been a drowning boy lashing out, trying to make someone else feel as powerless and alone as he felt. It didn't excuse what he'd done, but it explained it. Robert made a decision that surprised even his own brothers. "We're going to help him." "The kid who tortured Julia?" Ben asked, incredulous. "The kid who's living our story?" Robert corrected. "How many of us hurt people when we were hurting? How many of us made terrible choices because we didn't know how to ask for help?" He paused. "We break the cycle. That's what we do." 2 days later, 6 bikers showed up at Tom Bradford's law office. The receptionist nearly called security. "We're not here to threaten you," Robert said, settling his massive frame into a chair that creaked under his weight. "We're here to help. Your son is falling apart. You're falling apart. And we've been where you are." Tom Bradford tried to bluster, to put on his lawyer face, but it crumbled quickly. "My wife died," he whispered. And suddenly he wasn't a successful attorney. He was just a man who'd lost everything that mattered. "I don't know how to be both parents. I don't know how to talk to my son about his mother. I don't know how to stop drinking long enough to feel the pain. And Nicholas, God, what he did to that little girl." "He's hurting," Miguel said gently. "Hurt people! Hurt people! But healing people heal people. Let us help." They got Tom Bradford into a veterans support group. He'd served in the Navy before law school, something he'd buried along with his grief. They invited Nicholas to the youth mentorship program. The club ran for at-risk kids. The first Saturday, Nicholas showed up at the clubhouse. He stood in the doorway, exactly as Julia had, weeks before Small. Scared, uncertain, Julia was in the workshop, helping Ben rebuild a carburetor, her hands covered in grease, and her face split with concentration and joy. She looked up when Nicholas entered, and every biker in the room tensed, ready to protect her. But Julia did something that shocked everyone. She stood up, wiped her hands on a rag, and walked over to Nicholas. For a long moment, they just looked at each other. The bully and his victim, both of them children who'd learned young that the world could be cruel. "I'm sorry," Nicholas said, his voice breaking. "I was horrible to you. You didn't deserve any of it. Your dad's dog tags, the names I called you, pushing you." He was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "My mom died, and I was so angry, and I took it out on you, and I'm so sorry." Julia studied him for a moment. Then she handed him a piece of sandpaper. "Help me with this bookshelf, Roberts, teaching me to build. The corners are really hard." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a start. Over the following months, the clubhouse became a second home for both children. Nicholas learned that strength didn't come from making others feel small, came from building things, from helping others, from admitting when you were wrong and working to be better. Julia and Nicholas became, against all odds, friends. Not the kind of friends who forgot the past, but the kind who acknowledged it and chose to build something different for the future. Tom Bradford got sober. It wasn't easy. He relapsed twice. But Time bikers showed up at his door at 3 a.m., drove him to meetings, sat with him through the shakes and the tears. Jennifer, Julia's mother, finished her nursing degree with help from a scholarship fund the club had quietly arranged. She stopped working double shifts and started being home when her daughter needed her. The clubhouse expanded its youth program. More kids showed up, children from broken homes, from poverty, from abuse. The bikers taught them mechanics, gave them structure, showed them that being tough didn't mean being cruel. Years passed. Like chapters in a book, Julia grew from a scared 11-year-old into a confident young woman. Nicholas transformed from a bully into an advocate, starting an anti-bullying program at their high school that spread to 3 other districts. On graduation day, Julia stood at the podium as class speaker. The auditorium was packed: families, teachers, students, and in the very back row, standing because they'd arrived late and all the seats were taken, 32 Hells Angels in their leather and their pride. Julia's voice rang out clear and strong. "Everyone talks about family like it's just blood and DNA, But I learned something. When I was 11 years old, and desperate enough to walk into a biker clubhouse and ask strangers to be my dad. She paused, looking directly at the back row. Family isn't about biology. It's not about who you're born to. Family is about who shows up when everything is falling apart. Family is about who stays when it would be easier to leave. Family is about who sees you at your worst and loves you anyway. The biker stood a little taller. I asked for one dad for one day, Julia continued, her voice thick with emotion. And 32 men showed up and decided I was worth protecting. They didn't just come to my school, they came into my life. They saved me from abuse. They taught me to be strong. They showed me what real men look like. Not men who use their power to hurt, but men who use their strength to protect. She looked at Nicholas, sitting in the front row with his father. Beside him, both of them sober, both of them healing. They taught me about forgiveness, about second chances, about how hurt people, but healing people heal people. The audience was silent, hanging on every word. So, to everyone graduating today, I want you to remember this. You get to choose your family. You get to decide who deserves a place in your life. And sometimes, the people who save you don't look anything like what you expected. Sometimes your heroes wear leather jackets and ride motorcycles and have tattoos and beards. Sometimes your heroes are the people everyone else is afraid of. The auditorium erupted in applause. Students stood, then parents, then teachers. The bikers in the back stayed standing, many of them wiping their eyes with rough hands that had built engines and changed Julia's oil and dried her tears. After the ceremony, Robert approached Julia with a small package wrapped in leather. "Open it," he said gruffly. Inside was a vest smaller than the ones the bikers wore, but made with the same care, the same quality. On the back, it read, "Honorary brother, forever family." Julia put it on, and it fit perfectly. Which dad would be proud? She asked, touching her father's dog tags that still hung around her neck. Jennifer, her mother, laughed through her tears. All of them, baby, all 33 of them. Nicholas stood nearby with his own father, both of them witnesses to this moment. Tom Bradford extended his hand to Robert. "Thank you," he said simply, "for everything, for showing me what it means to really be a father." Robert shook his hand. "You did the work, counselor. We just gave you a push." As the sun set over the parking lot, Julia stood with her motorcycle family, her mother, her friend, Nicholas, and his father. They'd all come from darkness, from loss, from pain, from loneliness. But they'd found each other, and in finding each other, they'd found light. That Tuesday afternoon, years ago, when an 11-year-old girl with a black eye had pushed open a heavy steel door and asked the impossible, she'd had no idea she was starting a ripple effect that would change dozens of lives. She'd been looking for one dad for one day. She'd found a family for forever. The message was simple. Nobody should face the darkness alone. Ask for help. Offer help. Show up. Stay. Love fiercely. Protect those who can't protect themselves. Judge people by their actions, not their appearance. And sometimes, the most unexpected people become your greatest heroes. This is the Road Motorcycle Diaries, where we share stories that prove humanity is worth believing in. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. Would you be brave enough to ask for help like Julia did? Share this story with someone who needs to remember that heroes come in all forms, and that family is what you make it. Thank you for riding with us today.